One of the most integral aspects of any Power Rangers season is the villains that our heroes must fight. Today I am specifically talking about the 10 best main villains of the franchise. So no generals or puppet masters, just the central villain we see for most of the series. Alright, let's get started.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
Number 10 is the leader of the Nilox and the main villain of Samurai and Super Samurai, Master Xandred. While his personality isn't much worth bragging about, he is more here for his power and design. Again, not amazing, but I didn't really find him annoying either, so he makes the list.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
Alright, number 9 is Zio's King Mondo of the Machine Empire. Things I liked about Mondo were his design, his initial entrance, and his moments of weakness in regards to the Damocles sword. Unfortunately, the power of him and his army never lived up to their initial display when kicking out Rita and Zed, and he just isn't interesting enough to place any higher.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
Number 8 is the sort of, but not really, Trubian Emperor, Grum. He has a cool design and a good voice, if a tad too gruff at times. There's a lot to like about Grum, in that he can be genuinely creepy, is a successful galactic conqueror, often successful with his plans as he utilizes diversionary tactics, a great fighter and isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, plus I liked his feud with Doggy Kruger. Though Grum isn't all great. Sure, it's cool that he went down to Earth, but sometimes he did so for, absolutely no reason, and it was kinda lame that it was revealed that he was serving some other being.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
Speaking of successful villains, number 7 is the only Power Rangers villain to conquer the Earth, the Slayer of Billions, the one immortal Venjix. Venjix is cool for somewhat the same reasons as Grum. His success, voice, the design of his humanoid forms, his willingness to fight and his fighting ability. What puts him above Grum is that his success is specifically on Earth, and his brutality both in his quest for pure annihilation, how many people he killed, and his various cyborg-related experiments. The close proximity of this brutality to the main characters made Venjix a character you loved to hate, and made his death incredibly satisfying.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
Overall, Wild Force was considerably lighter in tone than the seasons right before it. But the second Master Org, Dr. Victor Adler, was a major exception to that. His backstory lands somewhere in the middle between somewhat scary, somewhat sympathetic, and very creepy. His personality isn't that deep, and admittingly his voice is usually too monotone, but man, when he's mocking cool about murdering his parents, now that's a Power Rangers villain. And again, this villain has good fighting ability. In the finale, he destroys a ton of Zords.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
Scorpius was really boring, but his death gave motivation to the 5th greatest Power Rangers villain, Trakina. It was interesting to see her growth from a weak, bratty girl who could only work from the background, to a confident queen seeking vengeance, to a crazed, heartless monster after her transformation. Overall, a really great villain, but she could be annoying some of the time in early episodes, and she just isn't as great as the 4 villains above her.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
I talked a lot about Astronema in the final part of my top 20, so I'll try and be brief here. Astronema was an intelligent villain with a fleshed-out personality and backstory. She is also the only main villain to ever later become a Power Ranger, and her redemption arc was handled fairly well.
Alright then, it's morphin' time!
Starting off the top 3, we have the grandfather of great Power Rangers villains, the Emperor of all he saw, Lord Zed. A huge step up from Rita in every way. Zed has an awesome design, great voice, and had numerous victories during his reign. And while he didn't like to get his hands dirty, when he did, we saw that he was very powerful. Zed can also be hilarious at times, without taking away from his intimidation factor. Sure, getting kicked out by Mondo and working under Dark Spectre demeans him a bit, but he's still awesome.
Alright then, it's more Morphin' time!
Number 2 is Rancic. His design is awesome. Vernon Wells' performance is spectacular. He has a sympathetic backstory. He killed a Power Ranger. And it's cool how he can pull weapons out of his body. Rancic is more concerned with causing general destruction, inducing terror, and of course not going back to jail rather than world domination. Also, Rancic is a caring father who looks after his daughter. And like I said in the top 20, Rancic surrendered, so he never actually lost to the Rangers. On the downside, I sometimes felt like him listening to Dendera made him a less effective villain, and even though it was cool to see him return to Wild Force and fight with the good guys, I didn't like how in the end he was cured of his mutation. That kind of sends the wrong message, you know?
Alright then, it's Morphin' time!
Alright, so the greatest main villain of a Power Rangers season is Mesogog. His design and voice are just fantastic, and the way he moves is just great too. The Dr. Jekyll to his Mr. Hyde, Anton Mercer, is great too. You can really see the tragedy of his character, and he has a personal connection to 2 of the Rangers. Mesogog is also very powerful, easily keeping his subordinates in line, defeating the main villain from the previous season in hand-to-hand combat, and his final form required the Rangers to use up all of their power just to defeat him. Basically, Mesogog is just pure awesome, and I love every minute he's on screen. Alright guys, those were my top 10 main villains of Power Rangers. Let me know which one was your favorite. And since this list ended up being a bit shorter than I thought, here's my brief thoughts on the villains I left off the list. Rita, I thought about putting on near the bottom, but I realized most of what I liked about her was when she was with Zed. In Season 1, she was just kind of annoying. Divatox, basically just Rita, but even more annoying, even more dumb. Vipra from Lightspeed Rescue, her acting is just beyond terrible. And she just isn't interesting or good at all. Lothor is way too comedic for the season he's in. I'm not really sure Mystic Force has a main villain. The Master is the Puppet Master villain of the season, but he's not around enough to consider him a main villain. I guess the closest thing might be Imperious. I forget how long of a stretch he was in the season, but I don't know. I don't really think they have a main villain. Operation Overdrive suffers from a similar problem, but this is because of factions, and they have 4 factions of villains, each one with a head, so we don't really get one main villain. We get quarters of main villains. None of them get enough screen time to be interesting. Daishi I really considered putting on the list, just because, I don't know, he's sort of cool, but I really think the writers really mishandled the whole Daishi-Jared relationship, so that kind of turned me off, and I didn't want to put him on. And last, and perhaps least, I can't even remember the names of the guys that were supposed to be the main villain for Mega and Super Mega Force. I really can't. They weren't memorable or that interesting in the slightest. I remember the one guy who might have been the main villain of Super Mega Force being somewhat funny at times, but they certainly aren't good enough to make the top 10. Alright guys, that's the end of it all. Again, let me know what your favorite villains are, why you like them, and be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more Power Rangers related content. I'm going to eventually finish my favorite episode of each season video, and I will continue turning my rankings of the different colors of Power Rangers into those short little videos. See ya.